Okay, we're going to talk about multiplying decimals, but first I just want us to practice counting decimal places. And when I say counting decimal places, I mean how many places are there after the decimal point. So in 14 and 357 thousandths, that's 1, 2, 3 places, because there's 3 digits after the decimal point. Okay, let's do another one. Okay, 3 and 89 hundredths. That's 1, 2 places after the decimal point. There's 2 places, okay, because there's 2 digits after the decimal place. Okay, if I do another one, how many places is that? Just 1 place after the decimal. Multiplying decimals. If I have, for example, 1 and 4/10 times 3/10, I can first pretend that there's no decimals. That would be like 14 times 3. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply 14 times 3. So 3 times 4 is 12. I'm going to carry my 1. 3 times 1 is 3, plus 1 is 4. So that I know that 14 times 3 is 42. Okay, well, I'm going to go back and add my decimal places. I had a decimal here and a decimal here. So I'm going to count how many decimal places are in each factor. There's 1 decimal place in that factor. There's 1 decimal place in that factor. So how many decimal places are there in both of the factors combined? 2. So that means I'm going to move 2 places. So my product, my answer, will also have 2 decimal places. Okay, let's do another one. This time I'm going to do 14 hundredths times 3. What? Is that like the previous one? Very similar. It still looks like 14 times 3. And if I ignore the decimal points, this is also 14 times 3. And I know that 14 times 3, if I was going to do this, I would ignore my decimal point and do 14 times 3. And I know previously that that's going to be 42. So now I'm going to go back and put my decimal points. I had 1 right there, and I had none on the 3. So let's count. 1, 2 in that factor, and I have 0 in that factor. So how many altogether for the product? 2. 1, 2. So my answer is 42 hundredths. Just like 1 and 4/10 times 3/10. And one thing I want to mention is this was also 42 hundredths. Notice that this time my product got smaller than my original factor. And y'all are always taught when you multiply you get a bigger number. But let's think about why. I know that 1 and 4/10 times 1 is 1 and 4/10. But just now I was doing 1 and 4/10 times 3/10. Is that more or less than a whole that I multiplied it by? That is less than the whole thing. So what I'm saying is I'm just going to get a part of it. Whoops, I started writing whole and part. Same time. Okay, I'm going to get just a part of it. So if I'm just going to have a part of the original 1 and 4/10, it only makes sense that my answer is smaller because I've got less than the whole 1 and 4/10. Now let's do another one. This time I'm going to do 14 hundredths times, you guessed it, 3/10. Okay, so again, if I ignore the decimal points, it's like 14 times 3. Which I know from the previous slides is 42. Okay, so again I've got 14 hundredths times 300ths. Again, I do not have to line up the decimal places when multiplying. Okay, so I'm just going to do 2 places for that factor. How many for the next factor? 1. And I forgot to write that's 42. So altogether, how many decimal places are there? 3. So that's 1, 2. Uh-oh, I don't have another place. But I know it needs to go there. So what should I put right there to hold that spot? I'm going to put a 0 right there to hold that spot. So I know my answer is 42 thousandths. Okay, let's do a bit harder one. Okay, now I'm going to do something bigger. For example, I'm going to do 2 and 47 thousandths times, 2 and 47 hundredths times 14. I'm going to pretend there's no decimal points and pretend it's 247 times 14. So I'm just going to do 247 times 14. 4 times 7 is 28. I carry my 2. 4 times 4 is 16, plus 2 is 18. Carry my 1. 4 times 2 is 8, plus 1 is 9. So I'm done with that, I'm going to put my 0 just like I normally do. And then I'm going to do 1 times 247, right? So 1 times 7 is 7, 1 times 4 is 4, 1 times 2 is 2. And I'm going to add it up. Okay, 8 plus 0 is 8. 8 plus 7 would be 15. Carry my 1. 9 plus 1 is 10. Plus 4 is 14. Carry my 1. And 2 plus 1 is 3. So my answer is not 3,458. I'm going to go back and put my decimal places in there. I had 1 right there, and that was it. So that's 1, 2 in the first factor, and 0 in the second factor. So how many will be in my product? 2. So my answer is 34 and 58 hundredths. Now one more quick activity before this ends. I know that 11 times 12 is 132. No matter what, it's 132. But now I'm going to go back and I'm going to add some decimal places to those. So I'm just going to add a couple of random ones here and there. And we're going to count the decimal places and figure out what would my answer be. So the first one is 11 hundredths times 12. So I look, are there any decimal places in the first factor? Yes, there's how many? 2. Are there any in the second factor? No. So how many total? 2. So my answer to 11 hundredths times 12 is going to be 1 and 32 hundredths. The next one, 1 and 1/10 times 1 and 2/10. Are there any places in my first decimal place in my first factor? Yes, 1. What about my second factor? 1. So how many is that total? 2. So that's going to be 1 and 32 hundredths. So we got the same answer with different problems because it's the same amount of decimal places and it's the same digits. Now the next one, 11 times 12 hundredths. Well, just knowing that I'm taking 11 times something that's less than a whole, it has to be less than 11, right? Do I have any factors in the first one? No. The second one, I have how many? 2. So my product will have 2. 1 and 32 hundredths again. All 3 of these equaled the same thing. What about the next one? The first factor has 2 places. The second factor has 1 place. So how many is that total? 3. So 11 hundredths times 1 and 2/10 is 132 thousandths. Now let's do the next one. My first factor has 2. My second factor has 2. So how many should my product have? 4. 1, 2, 3. Uh-oh, I gotta make another spot. So I put my decimal and I'm gonna need to put a 0 there to hold that place. So it's 132 10 thousandths is how you would say that, but it's decimal point 0.0132. I hope you feel a little bit better about multiplying with decimals.